Average. It's not a good word, is it? Or is it? I mean, it doesn't mean it's bad, does it? It doesn't mean that it's terrible. It doesn't mean it's rubbish. I mean, as a word, it means normal, somewhere in the middle. So probably not the best, but just something that's okay. So just how good is the teacher's career average pension, and is it worth it? Are you going to be happy paying out hundreds of pounds each month for something that is average? My aim today is to look at the numbers, forget the subjective descriptions, and let's get down to the nuts and bolts, the pounds and pence, where it really matters. First of all, what is it? It is a defined benefit scheme. That means you're buying a promise to pay you a pension according to the scheme's rules. This is not a scheme where your money and the money from your employer is put into a pot and you get direct access to that pot of money when you retire. What it does is build up benefits, and the career average benefits are that your pension amount is increased each year by 1/57th of your salary for that year. So if you earned £57,000 in a year, your pension would increase by £1,000. This is a promise, and the promise, your contribution varies, depends on how much you earn. So how much you pay for this goes between about 7.4% of your salary and will go all the way up to 11.7% if you earn over about £81,000 a year. But most of us pay around about 10%. Now, employees pay that. Employers pay in, at the moment, 23.6%. Wow. That's a massive amount. Compare that to the minimum that the government has told businesses have to pay if they run the other kind of schemes for pensions. For the other kind of schemes, the pot of money schemes, employers have got to pay in just 3%. That's the minimum. They can pay more, but the minimum is 3%. Schools have to pay 23.6%. This is the first clue that the teachers' pension schemes are actually very good value, not average. Schools are certainly not paying in what might be considered an average figure. However, this is a bit of a red herring. Because you're not buying a money pot scheme, what you're buying is a promise, you don't get to see that money. It doesn't really matter how much the employer is paying in. Schools could be asked to pay in 1 billion for each teacher each year, and it still doesn't alter the rules of the scheme. You'll still get 1/57th of your salary, not the billions that are being paid into the scheme by the schools. In addition to the pension, there are a couple of other added extras. You get life insurance. This is called the Death in Service Grant, and it is 3 times your annual salary. And there are also what are known as survivor benefits. This is a pension for your partner and for any dependent children. So the big question now, is it worth it? So let me look at the maths with you. Every month you pay between 7.4 and 11.7% of your salary. What you're getting back is 1/57th of your salary promised to you at the age of 67. Now, to make that easy, I've converted the 1/57th as a fraction to a percentage. So you're getting 1.75%. So let's take the most expensive of these to see what that means. 11.7 is the most expensive. Divide that by how much we are promised, the 1.75%, and that tells us that in 6 years, 8 months and 7 days, we will have been paid back the money that we put in. So that means as we started to get it back at 67, by the time we reach 74, we will have been given all of that money back. And crucially, don't forget that 1.75% promise is increased by inflation every year. So it will hold its value compared to the 11.7% we're paying in now. I call this the time to recoup. Now, I used the worst case, that of paying 11.7%. Remember, to pay that much, you'd have to be earning over £81,000, a lot over £81,000. But it's not the only thing that the time to get your money back on depends. The rate of pay is only one element. Clearly, if you're paying in a smaller percentage, you will get it back sooner. It also depends on how many years you work. This is because the promised amount is increased not only by inflation every year, but also by a 1.6% boost above inflation every year that you remain in the scheme. And it also depends if you take it early. If you go very early, you'll get between 50 and 60% of the promised amount. And then it will take you more years to get it back because of time. First of all, the rate of pay. These are the 2021-22 bands. The maths is still the contribution percentage divided by the amount gained percentage. So the time to recoup your money varies. Those early years in your career, when you're on the lower main scale points, will take less than 5 years to recoup. Whereas the years where you have paid more will take over 5. And if you do have periods at the very top, then more than 6 years. But that's all. Just 5 to 6 years of pension to get your money back. So going at 67, you would have it all back by the time you reach 73. And from then on, you're getting back more than you paid in. So on to how the number of years you work changes this. It makes a difference because a year after you've built up a promised amount, it is increased by inflation plus this 1.6% bonus. Wow, I hear you say, a whacking great 1.6%. Not exactly earth-shattering, is it? But hold on. This is actually very impressive because it is compounded. It is added every year to the previous year's figure. So after 1 year, that value of 1.75% is increased to 1.78. And then the next year, that 1.78 is increased again and becomes worth 1.81. And so on throughout your career. After 10 years, that means it's become worth just over 2%. That does make a difference. That first line I've got on here, without the bonus, would take 4.23 years to recoup the money. But with the bonus, it takes just 3.67. That's more than half a year sooner. And if we go on another 10 years to 20 years of service, that 1.75% promise has risen to be worth 2.37. And looking at what this means is that more than a whole year has been cut off of the time needed to recoup the money. Even those at the highest pay scales would get their money back in under 5 years. Though how many would be at that level for 20 years or more is a bit debatable. Now, one more dependency to look at. What happens if you take it early? If you take the pension before 67, you get a reduced pension. Going 5 years early means you get 76.9% of what you would have got at 67. So that 1.75% promise is cut by that same percentage. And so it becomes worth 1.34575%. And similarly, a bigger cut if you go 10 years early at 57, where it becomes worth just less than 1.07%. Now I'm going to stick with the minimum promise of 1.75% here rather than try to factor in what I showed you earlier about it gaining in worth, just to make it easier to explain. So bear in mind that although you're going to be getting more than 1.75%, so what this really represents is a kind of worst case scenario. You're actually going to be better than what I'm showing you here. Similarly, I'm going to take an average contribution figure of 10%. Rather than look at the range of 7.4 to 11.7. So I'm going to say we pay about 10%. So going early does mean you're going to take more years to recoup your money. This shows that if you went at 67, so not early, it would take 5.71 years to get your money back. So by the time you're approaching 73. So now what happens if you go 5 years early at 62? It takes you 7.43 years to get your money back. So that is year and a half, year and 0.7 longer. But hold on, what does that actually mean in terms of your age? What it means is that you've got your money back 7.43 years after 62, not after 67. So by the time you're 69 and a half, you will have it all back. Well, sooner than waiting to 67 because you start taking it earlier. And what about taking it 10 years early? Yes, it takes more years, over 9 years to get it back, but that 9 is added to the 57 that you started, so you've got all the money back before you're 67. Now, does that mean it's worth it? I'm not going to tell you the answer to that because I don't know. I'm not a financial advisor, I don't know your personal circumstances, and I don't know if anybody can tell you, basically because no one can tell the future. All I'm hoping to do is to lay out the maths and leave the decisions up to you. Your investment, that 10%, is locked up in the pension for a long time. But I would say that this is a promise by the government and not a stock market. It's probably as safe as an investment as you can get. Now, I've one more thing to look at, and that is to put this into pounds and pence rather than percentages. So let's look at a few career salary profiles. Here I've put a teacher profiles of somebody who's moved up the main scale 1 year at a time, progressed up onto the upper pay range, and then moved through that every 2 years to reach the top of the upper pay range after 4 years. I've got a spreadsheet I'll give you a link to later where you can create your own profile. Now, this teacher is a good average career teacher who's taken on no additional teaching and learning responsibilities. I've used today's pay scales, and I can do that throughout this because inflation is added to the promised amounts every year. However, if teachers in the future over years get years of below inflation pay rises, then the value of these figures, value of what you get, will be lower than what I'm showing you here. So if this person worked for 45 years and retired at 67, I can hear some of you laughing at that, just bear with me, then their pension would be just over 45,000. Taking it 10 years early, however, and I can see quite a few of you in your 40s and 30s are probably thinking this is more about the sort of reality that you may be considering, then that pension is just over 19,000. Now, here's a few more profiles to look at. I've got a teacher who took longer to progress through the upper pay range, one who never went onto the upper pay range, and a few examples of different levels of TLRs. There's a link at the bottom of the sheet. I'll put that in the video at the end so you can go and have a look for yourself and see whether or not you think it's worth it. So this is an average. Is it worth it? So let's look again at that classroom teacher who's had an average career, moved through the main scale, and then a couple of years to move up each of the upper pay range. By the time they've reached the age of 57, they've done 25 years at upper 3. The contribution rates have gone up as their pay has increased. But just how much has this pension cost them? Well, the total cost is just over £130,000. Wow, a lot of money, particularly if you're trying to save for a house or you've got lots of other expenses going. You think you could use it, but that's spread over a career of 35 years. And don't forget that this gets tax relief. So that £130,000 is 20% less than that, because if you hadn't paid it into a pension fund, the tax authorities would have taken 20% of it. So the real cost to you is more like £104,000. So what are you getting for that £104,000? Well, you're getting a pension of just over £19,000. That's every year from the age of 57. And it is index linked. It rises with inflation. That part is very important if you want to compare this to private pensions. Oh, and don't forget that if the person dies, the pension will continue to pay around about a third of it to their partner for their life. So is that worth it? I've just one more thing to show you. I went onto a private pension site to see what I would need to have to buy something similar in a private money pot pension scheme. In order to get a pension of a similar amount with similar index increases and to provide a partner with something if I died, I would need a pot of £1.2 million. Not the 104,000 that this pension scheme has cost me. Now, as I said, I'm not a financial advisor, I'm just an ex-maths teacher, but I think I can say with some confidence There's a reason why you won't find many independent financial advisors that would advise you to leave a teacher's pension scheme and go into a private pension scheme in its place.